Did you know that Al Capone had some rivals who were just as dangerous as him? During the Roaring '20s, Prohibition turned America into a playground for gangsters. Alphonse Capone, the kingpin of Chicago's underworld, became the face of organized crime. But he wasn't alone. In today's video, we dive into the lesser-known story of Capone's most dangerous rivals, who are also the reason behind the infamous St. Valentine's Day Massacre. So now, let's begin. When we think of organized crime in the 1920s, the name Al Capone immediately comes to mind. A chubby, cigar-chomping, fedora-wearing mobster with a devilish smirk. Yep, that's his unmistakable face right there. Born in Brooklyn in 1899, Al Capone moved to Chicago in the early 1920s. He worked under Johnny Torrio, a prominent figure in the city's criminal underworld. When Prohibition was enacted in 1920, banning the sale of alcohol, it created a huge black market. Torrio, seeing an opportunity, began smuggling and distributing alcohol. Capone, who was gifted with ruthless efficiency and a strategic mind, quickly rose him through the ranks. But like no gangster ever having total control without having some kind of rivalry going on, so did Al Capone. They were equally ambitious and cutthroat and were determined to carve out their own empires. In 1925, following an assassination attempt, Torrio retired, leaving Capone in charge. And Capone's real rivalry began after he took over Torrio's operations. These men, like Dean O'Banion, George Bugs Moran, and the Gina brothers, had their own stories of power, betrayal, and brutal violence. You may not hear their names often, but believe me when I say this. These men were a serious competition to Al Capone's hold on the crime scene in America. Imagine trying to run a criminal empire in a city already dominated by a ruthless and powerful figure like Al Capone. It's hard. They had to navigate a treacherous world where allegiances were fragile and betrayal was always just around the corner. Every move they made was a gamble, and the stakes were life and death. Now, let's see who was brave enough to give a tough time to Al Capone. Charles Dean O'Banion, or Dion as he was known, was a man of contrasts. By day, he was a charming florist who would greet ladies with a smile and a tip of his hat. By night, he was a ruthless gangster, a florist who arranged not flowers, but bloody vendettas. O'Banion was the leader of the North Side Gang, and his feud with Capone's South Side mob was the stuff of legend. His initial arrangement with Torrio allowed him to take part in the lucrative bootlegging action in Cicero, Illinois. However, as greed had no stopping, O'Banion's ambitions grew, and he soon started encroaching on territories that were off limits. He grew from committing petty crimes and went to the heights of commanding the best distilleries and breweries in Chicago. He actually dominated the illegal distribution of alcohol on the North Side, including Chicago's fashionable clubs and restaurants. The Sebin Brewery Chicago raid was a pivotal moment in the gang wars of Prohibition-era Chicago. O'Banion orchestrated this raid to strike a blow against his rival Johnny Torrio and his protege, Al Capone. You see, both O'Banion and Torrio had large stakes in the Sebin Brewery. He tipped off the police about a significant beer shipment at the Sebin Brewery, which was under Torrio and Capone's control. This tip led to a raid by the authorities on May 19, 1924, resulting in the confiscation of large quantities of beer and significant financial losses for Torrio. The consequences of the raid were severe. Torrio had to bail himself out of the matter and face substantial legal troubles. He had been double-crossed by O'Banion and was hit hard economically, losing a significant part of his operations revenue. According to estimates, he had lost the brewery and a total of $500,000 in cash, which is equal to today's $9 million. The raid also embarrassed Torrio publicly, making him appear vulnerable. Capone, who was fiercely loyal to Torrio and deeply invested in the brewery's success, was, of course, unhappy with this. On November 10, 1924, O'Banion was assassinated in his flower shop by agents of Al Capone. 3 men came to his flower shop to pick up funeral flowers. One grasped his hand in greeting and held it, while the other two drew pistols and shot him at close range. 2 bullets went into his chest and 2 in his throat. Some 15,000 people attended O'Banion's lavish funeral, and Torrio and Capone were also in attendance. O'Banion's death was the end of only some of Al Capone's rivals. So what about the other ones? Before I answer that, could you take a quick second to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video? Your support keeps this channel going and motivates me to create more great content. Thanks. Now back to the video. 6 brothers from Sicily, known as the Jenner brothers, were a formidable force in Chicago's underworld. They also had an initial allegiance with Capone and Torrio, and controlled the Little Italy district, west of Chicago's downtown region. They specialized in the illegal production and distribution of whiskey. Their operations often overlapped with those of O'Banion, leading to conflicts. As they started to market their whiskey in O'Banion's territory, they complained about this takeover to Torrio, but Torrio did nothing. Now, O'Banion took matters into his own hands and started hijacking Jenna liquor shipments, making it a direct challenge that couldn't be ignored. Despite initial attempts to avoid conflict, the tension between the Northsiders and the Jenner brothers escalated into open warfare. The Jennas were known for their ruthlessness. However, their bloody feud with O'Banion gang weakened their hold on power. By the late 1920s, the Jenner brothers had been picked off one by one, either by rival gangsters or other internal betrayals. This also solidified Capone's dominance. Remember the flower guy O'Banion? His spot was soon taken over by another of Al Capone's rivals. Bugs Moran was known for his fiery temper and tendency for violence and utterly despised Capone. He was the one who took charge after O'Banion's assassination in his flower shop, and their rivalry ended in one of the most infamous events in mob history, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. On February 14, 1929, 7 members of Moran's gang were lined up against a wall in a garage by some men dressed as police officers. What followed was a brutal display of execution, and all 7 men dropped dead on the spot. This massacre was Capone's way of sending a clear message: cross him and you would pay with your life. Moran, who was supposed to be at the garage that day, narrowly escaped this merciless end, and it marked the beginning of the end for his control over the North Side. The attack devastated his forces and showcased Capone's willingness to use extreme measures to eliminate his enemies. Although Moran continued his criminal activities, he never regained the power he once had. The climax of these gangland rivalries was undoubtedly the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. This event made it clear that Al Capone would go to fatal lengths when it came to the maintenance of his control. The massacre was a turning point in the history of organized crime, drawing national attention to the gang wars in Chicago and prompting a public outcry for law enforcement to crack down on the rampant violence. It was a masterstroke of brutality that left no doubt about who was in charge of the city's underworld. These gangsters, who were comparatively less powerful than Al Capone, did give him a rough time, and their battles over gaining supreme control are a reminder of the era's lawlessness. Al Capone was indeed the #1 mob boss, and he didn't back down from any of his rivals. At the very peak of his rule, his yearly revenue touched $100 million, which is about $1.8 billion in today's currency. This much money was as illegal as it could be, and came with a tremendous loss of human life. The turf war among Chicago's gangs caused roughly 700 deaths from 1920 to 1930, directly or indirectly. Al Capone alone was responsible for at least 200 murders. His willingness to use extreme violence ensured his dominance, but also contributed to his downfall, as the public and authorities eventually turned against him, leading to his conviction on tax evasion charges and imprisonment. The police struggled to end these gang battles because of corruption, limited resources, and the sheer power of organized crime. Many law enforcement officials were bribed to stay out of the matter by gangsters. Plus, the gangs had no shortage of arms and weapons, which outmatched the police in both firepower and strategy. As alcohol purchase wasn't available in the Prohibition era, the gangs had some level of public favor too, because they were, at the end of the day, providing them with all the booze they wanted. The end of Prohibition in 1933 resulted in a sudden drop in the profitability of illegal alcohol, undermining the gang's primary income source. Al Capone's capture demonstrated the government's commitment to fighting organized crime, leading to the gradual decline of the powerful gangs that once dominated cities like Chicago. And with time, the police were able to contain the lawlessness which was at its peak during the Prohibition era. So tell me, what do you think of this era in American history? Write down in the comments section. Watch this video on the screen now if you want to learn more about Al Capone's real-life facts. Thanks for watching this one, everybody, and I'll see you there.